In this ShaderFX demo, we're going to create a shader that does reflection mapping with a cube map. So I'll go ahead and bring up my ShaderFX interface. And the first thing that we need is the normal of the surface. So I'm going to put down a surface vector node, make sure it's set to normal. Then I want to transform my surface vector from tangent space to world space. So I'm going to pick world space transform. And so what that does is a vector coming in tangent space will be converted into world space. Then I can use my world space vector to create a reflection vector. So I'm going to go math, reflection vector. And so I've got my surface normal coming in and a reflection vector coming out. And I can use the reflection vector to look up the color in a cube map. So I can go map, cube map, vector. I've got it all wired up there. Now I'm going to go to the disk and look for a cube map. Cube maps are always stored in DDS format, and you can use ATI's Cube Map Gen or NVIDIA's Photoshop plugin to create cube maps in DDS. So I'm going to pick this Sun All cube map that ships with Max, and we'll wire that into the ambient color socket. And I'm going to minimize ShaderFX here, and you'll see that my teapot now has a nice reflective surface. This is a mirror shader, so it reflects everywhere. Well, what if we want to create a shader that only reflects on the edges? That's a fairly standard property of objects, where they're more reflective at glancing angles than when you're looking straight at them. So what I'm going to do is bring the ShaderFX interface back up here. And the way that we do reflections on just the edges is with a Fresnel term. So I'm going to bring in my Fresnel term group, and I need to wire my surface normal into the input socket of the Fresnel term. And I'm just going to go ahead and break this connection and minimize a couple of these nodes here just to clean up my workspace a little bit. I'm going to move my cube map over. And what we need to do is blend a cube map in a color. So I'm going to go over here to Maps and put in a new color node. And we want to blend those two with linear interpolation. So I'm going to add a linear interpolation node. And our blend value is going to be our Fresnel term. So I'm going to wire that in. And in the Fresnel term, I'm going to set scale to, say, 2. And I'm going to set the color to black so that the effect is a little more obvious. Then I'm going to wire my cube map into input A of the Fresnel term, and my color into input B of the Fresnel term. Now this is going to be my ambient color. I'll just minimize a couple of these nodes here. And we're going to pass the result into the ambient color socket of the material node. Now when I minimize ShaderFX, you'll see that my teapot now has reflections, but only right around the edges of the teapot. Now just for a last little finishing touch, we're going to add some specular highlights. So I'm going to pull out specular color and go Maps Color RGB to give the specular some color. And then glossiness, we're going to give it a glossiness value. And so I'll pick the constant node. And the constant node is just basically a number. So I'm going to give it a value of, say, 64 to make it nice and glossy. So now we'll minimize ShaderFX again. And you'll see that I've got specular highlights on my teapot and some nice Fresnel reflections right around the edges. So just here in the last few minutes, I've created a shader that has some pretty realistic looking reflections and some specular highlights really simply by just wiring a few nodes together. That's the beauty of the interface of ShaderFX. It really encourages you to play around with different effects and makes it really easy to get the look that you want on your surface.